But first, the federal government's response to a Chinese warship's deliberate attack on our naval divers last week, which now has our Japanese allies rightly concerned about increasing tensions in our region. Now, as we know, the Prime Minister has refused to disclose whether he confronted Xi Jinping about the incident when they met last week at the APEC summit in San Francisco. He claims you don't deny or confirm this stuff. Now, that's not how other Prime Ministers have handled such difficult issues, including my next guest, former Prime Minister Tony Abbott. Tony, welcome to the program. Thank you for your time. The PM's refusing to give a straight answer here about whether or not he confronted Xi about Chinese naval attacks on our naval divers. If this had happened during your tenure as PM, what would you have done? And do you buy his line that he can't answer questions from the media about this?
Peter, thanks for having me. I think it's almost inconceivable that a Prime Minister speaking to another national leader whose military personnel had harmed our military personnel would not have raised this subject. So I'm confident that our Prime Minister would have raised this with President Xi. And given that he almost certainly has done so, I do think it's a pity that he hasn't told us, because any doubt about whether our Prime Minister is standing up for Australia's national interest with other leaders is quite corrosive, and it should be dispelled as quickly as possible.
Yeah, he doesn't need to say what he said, but surely given, as you say, our divers were injured by their Navy, he's got to put it on the record that he stood up for Australia's national interest, surely. And if he didn't, doesn't that say perhaps you're giving him the benefit of the doubt that I perhaps am not?
Well, that's quite correct, Peter. I mean, I didn't go into chapter and verse of the shirt front discussion I had with President Putin of Russia, but I certainly indicated publicly at the time that it had been a pretty robust conversation, as it should be, because back then a Russian missile had killed almost 40 innocent Australians. Now, thank God in this instance, it's much less objectively serious, but nevertheless, no one should be allowed to harm our people without a strong reaction from Australia, because we are a self-respecting country. We shouldn't be pushed around by anyone, even and perhaps especially a global bully like China under the current government.
Let's go to the calls today from Peter Dutton, wanting to see moral courage and clarity in unequivocally condemning anti-Semitism in Australia. Now, I suspect in part he's pointing at attempts by some in the media and Labor to create some sort of moral equivalence between anti-Semitism, which is rife, and the almost non-existence of Islamophobia. You and others have called the moment that we're living through right now as a civilisational moment. What do you mean by that?
There's a real crisis of self-confidence in countries such as ours. The Anglosphere, which has done so much to lead the world into a better place, is plagued by this self-doubt. And this is why so many people in countries like Australia seem to prefer Hamas, a terrorist death cult, to a liberal democracy such as Israel, which always does its best to try to ensure human decency is recognised and protected. And I think that that night, October the 9th, when you had hundreds of Australians chanting, I shrink even from mentioning what they were chanting, but this was just a shameful moment, an absolutely shameful moment, and a moment of unutterable shame. And we should be doing everything we humanly can to redeem ourselves by making it absolutely crystal clear that in this existential struggle between the Hamas death cult and the only liberal democracy in the Middle East, Israel, we are unequivocally on Israel's side. No ifs, no buts, no false equivalence, no phony invocation of Islamophobia, along with the rampant anti-Semitism that we've seen on our streets and the streets of other Western cities. We are on Israel's side in this struggle.